Hey there, welcome to Shadow Archives. I have some news for you. A while back, I asked where you'd prefer ads, and you know what? The response was clear. Most of you said no ads at all would be better. So I've made a decision. I've turned off monetization completely. From now on, it's ad-free, just like when I started this channel. If you do see any ads, that's YouTube placing them automatically, not me. From my side, no interruptions, just pure storytelling. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from tonight. And if you enjoy these stories, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Now get comfortable, take a deep breath, and let's begin. My cousin still remembers that afternoon clearly, even though at the time she had no idea she was about to witness the beginning of something horrifying. It was the middle of summer, the kind of heat that presses down on everything and makes even simple movements feel exhausting. The air was dry, the sun was harsh, and the road outside their house shimmered slightly from the heat. It was a quiet day, nothing unusual, until there was a knock at the door. When my cousin opened it, she immediately knew something was wrong. The woman standing there was her neighbor, someone they all knew fairly well. She lived about 3 miles away, down a long dirt road, not the kind of distance people casually walk in that heat, especially not this woman. She was not someone who enjoyed walking long distances, and she definitely wasn't the type to show up unannounced. Seeing her there, sweaty and breathing hard, was strange enough on its own, but it was her behavior that really set off alarm bells. She was jittery, unable to stand still. Her hands shook slightly as she spoke, and her eyes kept darting around the room as if she expected something terrible to happen at any second. She kept repeating herself, talking in circles, saying she hadn't heard from her husband all day. She said she was worried. She said she was scared to go home. The way she said it wasn't calm or logical. It sounded panicked, almost desperate, like she was trying to convince herself more than anyone else. At first, my cousin thought maybe there had been an argument, or maybe her husband hadn't answered his phone and she was overreacting. But something felt off. The woman didn't sit down properly. She perched on the edge of the chair, bouncing her leg, rubbing her arms, wiping sweat from her face, even though there was a fan running in the room. She kept glancing toward the door, then away, as if the thought of going back outside terrified her. While the neighbor talked, my cousin's mom walked into the room. She only stayed for a moment, but her expression changed almost instantly. She didn't interrupt or ask questions. Instead, she quietly walked over to my cousin and gently pulled her aside, out of the neighbor's earshot. In a low voice, she told my cousin to keep the woman talking. Ask her questions. Don't let her leave. She said she was going to call the police. My cousin was confused and asked why. That's when her mom told her what she had noticed. On the front of the woman's dress, near the hem, was a dark, sticky-looking chunk of something that resembled raw hamburger meat. It was smeared into the fabric, dried slightly at the edges. At first glance, it could have been food, but the placement didn't make sense, and the smell was wrong. Faint, metallic, not like something from a kitchen accident. Her mom didn't say it out loud in the room, but she suspected blood, and not just a little. She thought the woman might be in shock, that something very bad had happened back at her house. My cousin swallowed hard, but did exactly what she was told. She went back to the living room and gently kept the conversation going. She asked about her husband, about when she last saw him, about why she was afraid to go home. The woman's answers were scattered and inconsistent. No, she said he had been busy. She said he was always in the way. She laughed at odd moments, then suddenly went quiet, staring at nothing. Minutes felt like hours while they waited. When the police arrived, the woman jumped slightly, as if startled by the sound of authority entering the house. The officers spoke calmly and asked her to step outside with them. She complied, still jittery. still not making much sense. She repeated that she hadn't heard from her husband and that she didn't want to go home. She never once asked them to check on him. That detail would stand out later. The officers decided to do a welfare check at her house. What they found there confirmed everyone's worst fears. Inside the house, the air was heavy and stale. The living room was quiet, almost unnaturally so. The first thing they noticed was the recliner. It was soaked in blood, not splattered or spotted, but deeply saturated, as if someone had been sitting there while bleeding heavily for a long time. The fabric was dark and stiff, and the smell was unmistakable. From the recliner, there was a trail of blood leading toward the stairs. The trail wasn't a single smear. It showed handprints, drops, streaks, evidence of someone struggling to move while injured. Halfway up the stairs, the officers found something that made even experienced professionals pause. They found fingers, several of them. They were scattered on the steps, severed cleanly enough to leave no doubt about what had happened. The amount of blood suggested the injuries had not been immediately fatal. Whoever had been hurt had still been alive long enough to try to climb. At the top of the stairs, in the bedroom, they found her husband. He was dead. The scene told a story more clearly than any words ever could. He had been attacked with a butcher knife. The wounds were violent and intentional. This was not self-defense. This was not an accident. This was rage, or something colder than rage. When the woman was questioned, the truth came out. She admitted that she had killed him. She said it without emotion, without tears, as if she were explaining something minor and inconvenient. She said she did it because he was taking up too much of her time. That was it. No argument, no long explanation, just that simple, chilling reason. She had attacked him while he was sitting in his recliner. When she left him, she believed he was dead. But he wasn't. He had somehow managed to get up, injured, bleeding, likely in unbearable pain. He started toward the stairs. He was trying to reach the bedroom where the phone was. He was trying to call for help. She heard him moving. Instead of leaving, she attacked him again. On the stairs, she cut off several of his fingers. The injuries were so severe that he could no longer continue. He collapsed. He went still. She believed he was dead then. Satisfied, she left the house. He almost made it to the phone. That detail haunts everyone who hears this story. The idea that he was so close to saving himself, that survival was only a few steps away, makes the whole thing unbearable. Those last moments alone in the house, bleeding, trying to climb the stairs, are impossible to imagine without feeling sick. After she left, she didn't call for help. She didn't run to the police. Instead, she walked 3 miles in the heat, through dirt roads, to my cousin's house. She sat in their living room, jittery and smiling at the wrong times, with pieces of her husband still on her dress. Looking back, my cousin realizes how close they all were to danger themselves. If her mom hadn't noticed the stain, if she hadn't trusted her instincts, if they had let the woman leave and go back home, anything could have happened. No one knows what she might have done next or who else she might have hurt. The woman was arrested and charged. The case shook the entire community. People struggled to understand how someone could commit such violence and then calmly walk to a neighbor's house as if nothing had happened. Friends and neighbors replayed every interaction they had ever had with her, looking for signs they might have missed. But sometimes there are no signs, and sometimes people carry something dark and hidden, and it only reveals itself when it's too late. For my cousin, the memory never fully faded. She still remembers the way the woman's leg bounced nervously, the way her eyes wouldn't settle, the way her mom's voice dropped when she said to keep her talking. She remembers the heat of that day, the quiet of the house before the police arrived, and the feeling that something was deeply wrong even before anyone knew the truth. What stays with her most is the small details. The stain on the dress, the fact that the woman never once asked the police to help her husband, the knowledge that someone could sit across from you, smiling and talking, while hiding something so horrific. It changed the way she sees people. It made her understand that danger doesn't always look dangerous. Sometimes it looks like a neighbor asking for company on a hot summer day. And somewhere in that house, at the top of the stairs, a man died believing he was moments away from help. It started in a quiet, rural part of Wisconsin, the kind of place where nothing ever seems to happen. Long stretches of road, houses spaced far apart, neighbors who recognize each other's cars rather than faces. The sort of community where people don't lock their doors religiously, and where kids still get on the school bus each morning without a second thought. It was there just last year that a family was found murdered inside their own home. The parents were dead when police arrived. The call had gone out quickly, and officers were on the scene in roughly 4 minutes, which in a rural area is almost unheard of. Even with that rapid response, it was already too late. There were no signs of life. And more unsettling than the crime itself was what wasn't there. Their daughter, a girl around 13 or 14 years old, was gone. At first, no one knew what to think. In the immediate aftermath of something so violent, speculation fills the empty space where facts should be. Some people wondered if she had been kidnapped. Others whispered that maybe she had been involved somehow, that she had run away, or that she was hiding. There were darker theories too, ones no one wanted to say out loud, but still thought about late at night. The truth was that no one knew anything for sure, and the lack of answers made everything worse. Search teams combed the area. Officers went door to door. Volunteers walked fields and forests, calling her name into the cold air. Tips came in, most of them useless. Days passed, then weeks. With every passing hour, the chances of finding her alive felt like they were slipping away. In missing person cases, time is cruel. The longer someone is gone, the quieter the hope becomes. The story spread beyond the local community. People across the state and beyond heard about the girl who vanished after her parents were murdered. Her face appeared on news broadcasts and social media posts. Candlelight vigils were held. Strangers prayed for her. Even as many privately accepted the idea that she was probably dead. In cases like this, happy endings are rare, and everyone knows it. Winter set in, hard and unforgiving. Northern Wisconsin winters are brutal, with deep snow, freezing temperatures, and long nights. Any thought that a child could survive outside for long was impossible. If she had been taken, the assumption was that she was either no longer alive or would never be found. As weeks turned into months, the case grew cold in more ways than one. By 88 days passed. Nearly 3 months after her disappearance, on a freezing winter day, something unbelievable happened. In a small town roughly 40 minutes away from her home, a woman was walking her dog. It was an ordinary moment, the kind that blends into every other day. Then, out of nowhere, a girl ran into the street. She was frantic, thin, exhausted. She didn't look like someone who had simply run away. She looked like someone who had been surviving something. The woman stopped, confused and alarmed, and listened as the girl spoke. It didn't take long to realize who she was. Against every expectation, the missing girl was alive. She had been held captive the entire time. For 88 days, she had been confined in a place she couldn't leave, controlled by someone she didn't know, cut off from the world while the rest of it slowly gave up hope. Somehow, she had managed to escape in the dead of winter and run until she found help. The relief was overwhelming. People cried, communities celebrated, news outlets called it a miracle. And for a brief moment, the story felt like it might finally end on a note of hope. But then the details came out. The man who murdered her parents and abducted her was not someone from her past. He was not a family friend, a neighbor, a teacher, or someone who had been lurking in her life. He had never spoken to her. He had never messaged her. He had never followed her online or tried to groom her in any way. She had never met him. One ordinary morning, he was driving to a new job. It was a job he would only keep for a single day, though that detail hardly matters compared to what followed. As he drove, he saw her. She was getting on her school bus, doing nothing unusual, just another kid starting another school day. From a distance of about 100 feet, he noticed her, and in that moment he decided that he was going to take her. There was no long-term planning, no build-up, no warning signs anyone could have noticed. He didn't know her name. He didn't know her family. He didn't know anything about her life. But he decided right then and there that he would murder her parents and abduct her. That single impulsive decision destroyed an entire family. This is the part that lingers, the part that people can't stop thinking about once they hear it. We are taught over and over again that danger comes with signs, that predators groom their victims, that there are red flags, moments where something feels off if you're paying attention. We tell ourselves these things because they give us a sense of control. If there are warning signs, then maybe we can avoid becoming a victim. But in this case, there were none. The girl didn't make a mistake. She didn't trust the wrong person. Her parents didn't fail to protect her. They weren't careless or reckless. They were simply living their lives in a place they believed was safe, raising their child the best they could. And none of it mattered. A stranger saw their daughter for a few seconds and decided to end their lives. The randomness of it is what makes the story truly terrifying. Not just that something horrible happened, but that it happened without reason, without provocation, and without any realistic way to prevent it. There was nothing her family could have done differently that would have guaranteed a different outcome. For many people, that realization is deeply unsettling. It challenges the belief that we can always keep ourselves and our loved ones safe if we are careful enough. It forces us to confront the idea that sometimes safety is an illusion, and bad things can happen simply because someone else decides they will. During her captivity, the girl endured something no child should ever experience. While many details have been kept private to protect her, what is known is enough to understand the weight of what she survived. She was isolated, controlled, and trapped far from everything familiar. The fact that she survived at all, let alone managed to escape, speaks to a level of strength that is hard to comprehend. When she finally ran into the street, she wasn't just escaping a person. She was escaping nearly 3 months of fear, uncertainty, and survival. Every step she took toward help was a step away from a reality that had been forced upon her without warning. Her survival doesn't erase what happened. Her parents are still gone. Her life will never be what it was before. Trauma doesn't disappear just because the worst-case scenario didn't fully come true, but her escape does matter. It matters because it proves that even in situations that seem completely hopeless, survival is sometimes possible. Still, the case leaves behind uncomfortable questions that don't have satisfying answers. How do you protect yourself from someone who has never shown interest in you before? How do you prepare for danger that arrives without warning? So how do you live in a world where a stranger's fleeting thought can change everything? Most people don't want to sit with those questions for too long. It's easier to believe that tragedies like this are rare exceptions, that they happen to other people in other places. But stories like this one have a way of sticking in the mind, resurfacing during quiet moments late at night when the world feels less predictable. The girl's story is often framed as a miracle, and in many ways it is. But it is also a reminder of how fragile normal life can be, how quickly it can be shattered by a decision made in passing, and how little control we sometimes have over the choices of others. In the end, what makes this story so haunting isn't just the violence or the captivity, it's the randomness, the idea that one ordinary day, or in a place that felt safe, a family's life was destroyed, not because of something they did, but because someone else decided it would be. That is the part people can't forget. In 1982, a series of deaths shook the Chicago metropolitan area and quietly changed the way people across the world thought about something as simple as taking medicine. At the time, Tylenol was one of the most common and trusted pain relievers in American homes. People took it for headaches, fevers, muscle pain, and minor aches without a second thought. It was safe, familiar, and ordinary. That sense of safety is exactly what made what happened so terrifying. It began without warning. One by one, people in and around Chicago started dying, suddenly and unexpectedly. At first, the deaths seemed unrelated. Different ages, different neighborhoods, different circumstances. Some victims collapsed at home. Others became violently ill and died within hours. There was no obvious pattern, no shared event, and no immediate explanation. Then investigators noticed something small but chilling. Every victim had taken Tylenol shortly before becoming sick. This detail alone wasn't enough to raise alarms at first. Tylenol was used by millions of people every day. Correlation didn't automatically mean causation, but as more deaths occurred, the connection became harder to ignore. Medical examiners began testing the victims more closely, looking for toxins or substances that shouldn't have been there. What they found was horrifying. The Tylenol capsules taken by the victims had been laced with potassium cyanide, a fast-acting and extremely deadly poison. Ingesting even a small amount could kill someone within minutes. The victims had no chance. They took the medication expecting relief, and instead, they swallowed something lethal. By the time authorities fully understood what was happening, 7 people were dead. The realization sent shockwaves through Chicago. This wasn't an isolated accident or a manufacturing mistake. This was deliberate. Someone had taken Tylenol capsules, added poison to them, and put them back on store shelves for unsuspecting people to buy. The poisonings were random. The victims didn't know each other. They weren't targeted for personal reasons. They were chosen simply because they trusted a product that had always been safe before. Fear spread quickly. People were told to stop taking Tylenol immediately. Bottles were pulled from shelves across the city, then across the country. Pharmacies emptied. Medicine cabinets were checked. Families threw away pills they had used for years without concern. Parents panicked while wondering if they had unknowingly given poisoned medicine to their children. The randomness of the crime made it even worse. There was no way to know which bottle was safe and which wasn't. 2 identical bottles sitting side by side could have completely different outcomes. One could relieve a headache, the other could kill you. As the investigation unfolded, it became clear that the poisoning didn't happen at the factory. Johnson & Johnson, the company that made Tylenol, tested their production facilities and found no contamination. This meant the capsules had been tampered with after they were already in stores. Someone had purchased the medicine, altered it, and returned it to shelves. That detail introduced a terrifying idea. Anyone could do this. The capsules themselves made the situation even more dangerous. At the time, Tylenol was sold in easily opened gelatin capsules. They could be pulled apart, filled with poison, and resealed without leaving obvious signs. Consumers had no way to tell if a capsule had been tampered with just by looking at it. Police launched one of the largest investigations in Chicago's history. They traced where each victim had bought their Tylenol, trying to find overlap. They searched stores, interviewed employees, and followed every lead they could find. Tips poured in from the public. Some were sincere, some were cruel hoaxes, some were simply people terrified and desperate to help. Despite the massive effort, investigators hit a wall. No suspect was ever conclusively identified. No one was charged. No one was convicted. The person responsible for the poisonings vanished into history, leaving behind only questions and fear. As if the original tragedy wasn't enough, the case had another dark effect. Copycat crimes followed. Once the public understood how easily medication could be tampered with, other poisonings occurred in different places. Some were fatal. Others caused injuries. The damage rippled outward, turning a single crime into a nationwide crisis of trust. People no longer felt safe doing something as basic as taking pain relief. For Johnson & Johnson, the situation was catastrophic. Tylenol wasn't just a product. It was one of their flagship brands, a household name. The poisonings threatened not only lives, but the company's existence. How they responded would determine whether people ever trusted them again. Instead of denying responsibility or minimizing the danger, the company took an approach that was almost unheard of at the time. They acted quickly and publicly. Johnson & Johnson immediately warned consumers not to use Tylenol, even before authorities forced them to. They issued nationwide recalls, pulling millions of bottles off shelves. The cost was enormous, but the priority was clear: stop more people from getting hurt. They worked closely with law enforcement and health officials, sharing information openly. They used media outlets to spread warnings, understanding that fear spread faster than official reports ever could. Their message was direct and urgent. Don't take the product until it's safe. This response likely saved lives. The company didn't stop there. They began rethinking how medicine was packaged altogether. What came out of this tragedy reshaped the entire pharmaceutical industry. Tamper-resistant packaging became the standard. Seals were added. In plastic wraps, foil barriers, boxes that had to be opened in ways that made tampering obvious. Capsules were redesigned. Tablets replaced easily opened pills. The goal was simple. If someone tried to alter the product, consumers would know immediately. These changes didn't just apply to Tylenol. They applied to nearly all over-the-counter medications. What had once been optional became mandatory. The federal government stepped in as well. New anti-tampering laws were passed, making it a serious crime to interfere with consumer products. Penalties were increased. Oversight improved. The legal system recognized that product tampering wasn't just vandalism or mischief. It was a form of mass violence. The Chicago Tylenol murders fundamentally changed how society thought about safety. Before 1982, people assumed that items on store shelves were safe by default. Afterward, that assumption was gone. The victims became symbols of that shift. They weren't reckless. They weren't careless. They did exactly what millions of people did every day. They took a trusted medicine as directed. Their deaths weren't the result of personal choices. They were the result of someone exploiting trust. That's why the case still lingers in public memory. The lack of closure makes it even harder to accept. There is no name to attach to the crime, no trial transcript, no confession. The person responsible was never held accountable, and the motive remains unknown. Some believe it was done for attention. Others think it was an experiment in chaos. A few speculate about extortion or resentment toward corporations. None of these theories have ever been proven. What remains certain is the impact. Every time someone breaks a seal on a bottle, this case echoes quietly in the background. Every time a parent checks packaging before giving medicine to a child, they are benefiting from lessons learned through tragedy. Every warning label, every safety seal, every foil-backed blister pack exists because 7 people lost their lives in Chicago. The response by Johnson & Johnson is still studied today in business schools and crisis management courses. It's often described as an example of how transparency and decisive action can preserve public trust, even after something unthinkable happens. But no amount of praise can undo the loss. For the families of the victims, there was no silver lining. No reform could replace a loved one. No packaging innovation could bring someone back. All they were left with were questions and the knowledge that their loss helped prevent others from experiencing the same fate. The story also introduced a new kind of fear into modern life. A fear not of criminals breaking into homes, but of invisible threats hidden in everyday objects. It showed how fragile systems of trust can be, and how easily they can be exploited by a single individual. More than 4 decades later, the Chicago Tylenol murders remain unsolved. The bottles are gone. The capsules are redesigned. The shelves look safer. But the mystery is still there, unresolved. It's a reminder that sometimes the most profound changes come not from answers, but from tragedies that force the world to adapt. 7 people took medicine expecting relief. Instead, they unknowingly became part of a story that changed consumer safety forever, and the person who did it walked away, never identified, leaving behind one of the most chilling and influential crimes in modern history. For a long time, no one even knew how to describe what was happening. It didn't fit neatly into any category people were used to. It wasn't a single violent crime. It wasn't a break-in for money. It wasn't something that left obvious physical evidence behind. It was something quieter, slower, and in some ways more unsettling because of how long it was allowed to continue. It started in a furniture store. This was a small town, the kind where most people knew each other, or at least recognized familiar faces. The furniture store was one of those places people visited when they were settling down, redecorating, or trying to make a house feel more like home. It should have been ordinary, harmless, boring even. That's where he would appear. At first, he didn't do anything that crossed a clear line. See, he would stand nearby while women looked at chairs, couches, or tables. He never touched anyone. He never raised his voice. He just lingered too close for too long. His presence felt wrong in a way that was hard to explain. Women noticed him watching them, not casually the way someone glances around a store. He watched intently, studied, followed them from aisle to aisle. If a woman stopped to look at a chair, he would drift over and stand nearby, pretending to browse while keeping his eyes on her. Then he would make comments, not outright threats, not insults, just strange, unsettling remarks that felt personal even though they weren't. Things like, "That chair would look nice in my den," said with a tone that made it clear he wasn't really talking about furniture. Sometimes he would smile when he said it. Sometimes he wouldn't. Either way, the effect was the same. Women felt uncomfortable, uneasy, and watched. They would laugh it off at first, or ignore him, or move to another section of the store, and he would follow. Some women complained to employees. The employees shrugged. He hadn't done anything illegal. He was just talking, just shopping, just being odd. People in small towns learn early that being strange isn't the same as being dangerous, and that assumption would prove costly. What no one realized at first was that he wasn't just watching women in the store. He was watching them leave. One night, after a woman finished shopping and went home, something happened that changed everything. She had no idea she was being followed. She drove home like she always did, parked, and went inside. The house was quiet, normal, safe, or so she thought. At some point later that evening, she entered her living room. That's when he jumped out. He had already been inside. He screamed, "I knew you took my chair!" The shock alone was enough to send her into panic. He didn't just scare her and run. He chased her, yelling, screaming, accusing her of stealing something that had never belonged to him. She ran through her own house, terrified, not understanding how a stranger knew where she lived or how he had gotten inside. Eventually, she escaped and got help. When the police were called, the response was underwhelming. He hadn't hurt her physically. He claimed it was a misunderstanding, a joke gone wrong, a prank. No stolen property, no clear evidence, no arrest. People told her she was lucky. Word spread quietly among women in town. Warnings passed in hushed conversations. The people told each other to be careful, to lock doors, to trust their instincts. But there was no official action, no public acknowledgement that something was very wrong. And then it happened again. Another woman, same pattern, furniture store, lingering comments, being watched. Followed home, a break-in, waiting in the living room, jumping out, screaming accusations about a chair, chasing her through her own house, over and over. This wasn't a one-time incident, it wasn't 2 or 3. This went on for 5 years. 5 years of women living in fear, knowing that something could happen to them simply for shopping alone. 5 years of break-ins that were treated as nuisances rather than crimes. 5 years of terror dismissed as exaggeration. The man became a ghost story people told each other, except he was real. So what made it worse was how calculated it all was. He didn't attack randomly. He chose women who were alone. He chose moments when they were vulnerable. He invaded the most private space a person has, their home, and turned it into a place of fear. And he always used the same phrase. I knew you took my chair. It was absurd on the surface, but deeply disturbing underneath. It wasn't about furniture, it was about control, about ownership, about the idea that he believed these women had taken something that belonged to him, simply by existing and making choices without him. People eventually began to realize something even more disturbing. The police weren't doing nothing because they didn't care. They were doing nothing because of who he was related to. He was the sheriff's brother. That fact spread quietly, like poison through the town. Once people understood it, everything else made horrible sense. Reports went nowhere. Complaints disappeared. Calls were minimized. Victims were subtly discouraged from pushing further. In a small town, power doesn't need to announce itself. It just has to exist. Women who went to the police were met with skepticism. They were asked if they were sure, if they had misunderstood, if maybe they had exaggerated out of fear. They were reminded that the man had never physically harmed anyone, as if terror alone wasn't violence. Meanwhile, he continued, 5 years is a long time to live under that kind of threat. Women changed their routines. Some stopped shopping at the furniture store entirely. Others brought friends, husbands, brothers, or fathers with them just to buy a chair or a table. What should have been an ordinary errand turned into something that required planning and protection. Women couldn't buy furniture by themselves anymore. That's the part that still feels unreal, not because it happened once, but because it became normalized. People accepted it as a reality of life in that town, like bad weather, like a dangerous road you avoid. Everyone knew who he was. Everyone knew what he did. Everyone knew why nothing was being done, and yet nothing changed. There's a particular kind of fear that comes from knowing someone is watching you, and that the people meant to protect you won't intervene. It teaches you that safety isn't guaranteed by rules or law, but by proximity to power. And if you don't have that power, you learn to protect yourself however you can. Some women moved away. Some stayed and learned to live with the constant awareness that they were vulnerable. They double-checked locks. They avoided being alone. They stopped trusting that their homes were truly safe. The man never escalated to murder, but that doesn't make what he did less horrifying. If anything, the restraint makes it more chilling. It suggests control, planning, enjoyment drawn not from killing, but from terrorizing. Breaking into someone's house and waiting in the dark requires patience. It requires confidence that you won't be caught. It requires a belief that you are untouchable, and he was, for 5 years. When people look back on it now, the question isn't just why he did it. It's why everyone else let him, why warnings were ignored, why women were expected to adapt instead of the system protecting them, why the burden of safety fell on the victims instead of the person causing harm. The town eventually changed. Leadership changed. Time passed. The man aged. The incident stopped, though no one can say exactly when or why. There was no dramatic arrest, no public reckoning, just an unspoken agreement that it was over. But the damage didn't disappear. Women who lived through that time still remember it. They remember the feeling of being watched in a public place. They remember the way their homes no longer felt safe. They remember being told, directly or indirectly, that their fear wasn't important enough to matter. That kind of experience stays with you. It changes how you move through the world, how you assess danger, how you trust authority. It teaches you that sometimes the most frightening thing isn't the person hiding in your living room, but the knowledge that no one will stop them. This story isn't about one man alone. It's about power protecting itself, about how fear can be allowed to exist openly when it doesn't inconvenience the right people, about how women were forced to bring chaperones to buy furniture, not because the world was inherently unsafe, but because it was made unsafe by inaction. And it's about how easy it is for something deeply wrong to become normal, when people decide it's easier not to look too closely. 5 years. That's how long it lasted. And for the women who lived through it, 5 years was more than enough to change them forever. This is the story my mom almost never tells unless someone asks directly, and even then, she tells it calmly, almost flatly, like she's describing something that happened to someone else. But every time I hear it, I'm left shaken, not just by what happened, but by how close it came to rewriting everything that came after. This is the one that still haunts me, because it's impossible not to think about how different my life would be if she had reacted even slightly differently. It was late. She had just finished closing up after work. The bar was quiet, empty, stripped of the noise and energy it carried during business hours. Chairs were stacked, lights were off or dimmed, doors locked. That familiar feeling of relief, mixed with exhaustion, had set in. Closing shifts do that to you. You're tired, but you're also ready to go home, or ready to be done. She headed out the back, the same route she had taken countless times before. The alley behind the bar was narrow, poorly lit, and smelled faintly of old beer and damp concrete. It wasn't a place you lingered, but it was familiar enough that it didn't immediately register as dangerous. Routine has a way of dulling your sense of threat. Her car was parked not far away. She walked toward it, keys already in her hand. Mind probably halfway somewhere else. Home, bed, sleep. The normal things you think about at the end of a long shift. She reached her car and was just about to unlock the door when everything changed. A man stepped out and confronted her. There was no warning. No footsteps, she noticed. No sound that gave him away ahead of time. One moment she was alone, the next she wasn't. He had a gun, not a small one, not something that could be mistaken for anything else. It had a long barrel, unmistakable even in the dim light. He pointed it directly at her. There was no confusion about what he wanted or how serious he was. He told her to get into his car. The words were simple, flat, commanding. This wasn't a conversation. It wasn't a threat wrapped in uncertainty. It was a demand backed by the weight of a weapon that could end her life in a second. Time did something strange in that moment. My mom later said it felt both incredibly fast and impossibly slow. Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Her mouth went dry, her body flooded with adrenaline. Most people imagine they know how they would react in a situation like that. They imagine bravery or panic, compliance or escape. The truth is, you don't know until it happens, and when it does, your body often decides before your mind catches up. She did not scream, she did not freeze, she did not comply. Instead, she did something that still sounds unreal to me every time I hear it. She grabbed the barrel of the gun, not the handle, not his arm, the barrel itself. She forced it upward, pointing it toward the sky, away from her body, away from her head, away from her chest. And before he could fully process what was happening, she pulled the trigger. The gun went off. Then again, and again. Every shot discharged upward into the night. In seconds, the gun was empty. The sound must have been deafening. The flashes of light sharp and violent, but in that moment there was no room for fear of noise or attention. There was only instinct, only action, only survival. With the gun now useless, she didn't hesitate. She didn't wait to see what he would do next. She threw herself to the ground. Not fell, threw herself. She made herself dead weight, flat against the pavement, knowing that it would be harder for him to drag her, harder for him to force her into a car if she wasn't upright. She started pleading immediately, not screaming, not challenging him, but begging to be left alone. Using whatever words came out, whatever tone she could manage. In that moment, the dynamic shifted. The man hadn't expected this. Criminals who operate like this rely on fear and compliance. They rely on the assumption that the gun gives them complete control. When that control vanished, so did his confidence. Now he was standing there with an empty weapon, faced with a woman who had just turned the situation upside down in a way he couldn't have predicted. He was freaked out. That detail matters. He didn't escalate. He didn't attack her physically. He didn't try to fight her on the ground. He panicked. He got back into his car, and he sped away. Just like that. No final words, no threats, no chase. He was gone. My mom stayed on the ground for a moment longer, her body still buzzing with adrenaline, her hands probably shaking violently now that the immediate danger had passed. Then she got up, got into her car, and drove away. Physically, she was unharmed. No bullet wounds, no bruises, no broken bones. Mentally, though, she was changed. That kind of encounter doesn't fade easily. It embeds itself deep in your nervous system. Long after the danger is gone, your body remembers. Sudden movements, loud noises, dark alleys, being alone at night. All of it takes on a sharper edge. She was brave in a way that most people never have to be. But bravery doesn't cancel trauma. Courage doesn't erase fear after the fact. If anything, it sometimes makes it worse because afterward, you realize just how close you came to dying. When I think about this story, what scares me most isn't just the gun or the threat. It's how narrow the margin was, how thin the line between survival and catastrophe really is. If she had hesitated for half a second, if she had frozen, if she had believed that compliance was safer, if she had tried to run instead of acting, if the gun had been different, if he had reacted differently, if any one of those changes could have ended with her being forced into that car. And if that had happened, there is no version of this story that ends well. There is no reason to believe she would have survived. And if she hadn't survived, I wouldn't be here. That realization hits me hard every time. My existence, my entire life, balanced on a split-second decision made in a dark alley by a woman who refused to give up control, even when a gun was pointed at her. I don't know how I would live with that knowledge if I were her. Knowing how close it came, knowing how random it was, knowing that survival wasn't guaranteed, just seized. She doesn't talk about it often, but when she does, she never frames herself as a hero. She doesn't boast. She doesn't dramatize it. She usually shrugs and says she just did what she felt she had to do. But I see it differently. I see a woman who trusted her instincts completely, who acted decisively under unimaginable pressure, who understood, on some level, that giving up control would likely be the end. I also see the cost. Even though she walked away that night, part of her never really left that alley. Part of her stayed frozen in that moment, hearing the gunshots echo upward, feeling the cold ground beneath her, waiting to see what the man would do next. I think about it sometimes when I'm lying awake at night, when my mind drifts to uncomfortable places. I think about how easily entire family lines can be erased by violence, how many stories never get told because someone didn't make it out, how survival often looks ordinary from the outside but is built on moments of extreme clarity and courage. What also stays with me is how quiet the aftermath was. There was no parade, no news story, no dramatic justice. The man drove away and disappeared into the night. My mom went home and carried on with her life. That's how it often is. The most pivotal moments don't announce themselves. They don't come with witnesses or closure. They just happen, and you're left to live with the knowledge of what almost was. This story haunts me not because it's violent, but because it's fragile, because it reminds me that life is not guaranteed, that safety is not a constant, that sometimes everything you are depends on how someone else responds in a single moment. Had my mom not been so courageous, so decisive, so unwilling to submit, I likely would not be here today. That thought never stops being terrifying, and it never stops making me grateful. This is one of those stories that feels impossible to reconcile with what people expect violence to look like. There is no chaos at the beginning, no visible breakdown, no spiral that others notice in time to intervene. Instead, everything unfolds quietly, methodically, and with a level of control that makes it even more disturbing the longer you sit with it. He was an American diplomat, a man who by every external measure had succeeded. He was highly educated, fluent in 5 different languages, and trusted to represent the United States abroad. His career had taken him all over the world. He navigated foreign cultures, delicate negotiations, and complex political environments with apparent ease. He was intelligent, articulate, and respected in professional circles. He had married his high school sweetheart. Together, they built what appeared to be a stable and accomplished life. They had 3 sons, boys who were still young enough to believe their home was safe and predictable. To outsiders, this was a family that seemed firmly rooted in achievement and normalcy. There were no public signs of violence, no criminal record, no obvious warning labels. Eventually, he accepted a posting in Washington, D.C. For someone in his position, Washington was not just another assignment. It was a proving ground. Promotions mattered. Reputation mattered. Advancement was closely tied to identity. For many career diplomats, success was not just professional, it was personal. On a particular day, he learned that he had not been promoted. This detail matters because of how unremarkable the immediate response was. There was no outburst, no argument, no dramatic confrontation. He did not yell or storm out. He calmly left the office as if nothing out of the ordinary had occurred. Co-workers later recalled nothing that stood out about his demeanor. He did not appear angry or distressed. He simply walked away. From there, he began a sequence of actions that were deliberate, purposeful, and terrifying in hindsight. He drove to a bank and withdrew money. Then he drove to a hardware store. Inside that store, he purchased a shovel, a pitchfork, and a hammer. These were not items chosen at random. Each one had a function. Each one would later play a role. At the time, no one noticed. A man buying tools does not raise suspicion. Nothing about the transaction triggered alarms. The cashier did not know they were witnessing the logistical planning of a massacre. He then drove home. What happened next defies easy explanation, not because it is unclear, but because it is so starkly at odds with the life he had lived up until that moment. He entered his house and went to his mother. Using the hammer, he beat her to death. Then he went to his wife. She was asleep. He killed her next. Then he moved through the house to the bedrooms of his sons. They were 5, 10, and 14 years old. They were asleep. One by one, he murdered all 3 of them. There is no evidence of hesitation, no indication that he stopped or reconsidered. The sequence suggests determination rather than frenzy. This was not an explosion of rage that burned itself out. It was a task carried out to completion. Afterward, he did not collapse. He did not call for help. He did not turn himself in. He loaded the bodies of his mother, his wife, and his 3 sons into a station wagon. Then he drove. He traveled roughly 275 miles, leaving behind everything familiar, heading toward a densely wooded area. This was not a random destination. He chose a place where isolation would work in his favor, where the landscape itself would conceal what he intended to do. Once there, he removed the bodies from the vehicle and set them on fire. Fire is a deliberate choice. It destroys evidence. It complicates identification. It creates confusion. It suggests foresight rather than panic. When authorities began to investigate, they found the burned remains and traced them back to him. The scope of what had happened became clear quickly. This was not a disappearance. This was a family annihilation. Law enforcement began searching for him immediately. They tracked his movements across the United States, following financial records, witness sightings, and physical clues. Eventually, they located his car, abandoned in the Great Smoky Mountains. The area is vast, rugged, and heavily forested. It is the kind of terrain where a person can vanish easily, especially if they are determined to do so. From that point on, the trail went cold. Search teams were unable to locate him. There were no confirmed sightings. No body was found. No definitive evidence of suicide. Nothing that would allow authorities to close the case. He simply disappeared. Over the years, investigators considered multiple possibilities: that he died in the wilderness, that he assumed a new identity, that he fled the country using his knowledge of languages and international systems, that he blended into a place where no one would question his presence. What makes this case particularly unsettling is that none of those possibilities can be ruled out. He was intelligent. He understood bureaucracy. He understood how systems work and where they fail. He knew how borders functioned and how identities could be obscured. If anyone had the skill set to disappear intentionally, it was him. Because of that, he remains one of the most infamous fugitives in American history. He has been featured on the FBI's 10 Most Wanted list for decades. If he is still alive today, he would be around 81 years old. That detail alone is chilling. The idea that someone capable of this level of violence could still be alive somewhere, aging quietly, living an ordinary life, is deeply unsettling. But the true horror of this story does not lie only in the murders themselves. It lies in the absence of a clear motive that feels proportionate to the crime. He was not facing criminal charges. He was not exposed in a scandal. He was not about to lose his family. He had suffered a professional disappointment, yes, but one that countless people experience without resorting to violence. And yet, in his mind, that moment was enough to justify erasing his entire family. This raises questions that have no satisfying answers. What was happening inside his head long before that day? Were there signs that went unnoticed? Did he carry resentments, fantasies, or rigid beliefs about success and failure that no one else could see? Or was this a sudden psychological collapse triggered by something that struck at the core of his identity? Some experts suggest that cases like this involve a fragile self-image, where professional success is tied so tightly to self-worth that failure becomes intolerable. In those situations, family members can be viewed not as individuals, but as extensions of the self. When the self collapses, everything attached to it is destroyed as well. Others argue that this explanation still falls short, that even extreme narcissism does not fully account for the brutality or the planning, that something deeper and darker must have been present long before the promotion decision. The children especially haunt people who learn about this case. They had no role in his career, no understanding of what had happened that day. They went to sleep in a house where their father was supposed to be their protector. They never woke up. The wife, who had been with him since high school, likely believed she knew him better than anyone else in the world. Whatever internal world he was living in, she was not allowed access to it. She was killed, without warning, without explanation. His mother, too, was murdered, suggesting that the violence was not limited to a single relationship, but to the family unit as a whole. When people talk about this case, they often fixate on the mystery of where he went. Did he survive? Did he die? Is he still out there? But focusing only on that question risks missing the deeper, more uncomfortable truth. This was not a crime committed by someone on the margins of society. This was not someone who was visibly unstable or disconnected. This was a man who functioned at a high level in one of the most demanding professional environments in the world. And that is what makes it so frightening. It suggests that there are forms of inner collapse that are invisible until they are catastrophic. That intelligence and success do not immunize someone against violent ideation. That outward composure can coexist with unimaginable brutality. The fact that he was never caught compounds the unease. There was no trial, no confession, no explanation in his own words. The families of the victims never received closure. The public never received answers. Instead, the case exists in a kind of permanent suspension, frozen between what happened and what might still be possible. Every few years, age-progressed images are released. Investigators follow up on tips. People report sightings that ultimately go nowhere. Time passes, but the case remains open. And somewhere in all of this is the unsettling realization that if he is alive, he has lived decades beyond the lives he took. Decades of mornings, meals, conversations, and ordinary experiences that his wife and children were never allowed to have. This story lingers not because it is sensational, but because it destabilizes assumptions. It forces people to confront the idea that violence does not always come from chaos or desperation. Sometimes it comes from control, from calculation, from a person who appears calm enough to buy tools, go home, and methodically destroy everything they once claimed to love. It also leaves behind an uncomfortable silence. No manifesto, no suicide note, no final explanation, just absence. And that absence is what makes the story feel unfinished, even decades later. He did not just murder his family. He erased the possibility of understanding why, and as long as he remains unaccounted for, that erasure continues. Sorry to interrupt. If you're new here, I'd appreciate it if you subscribe to Shadow Archives for daily true horror content that will haunt your dreams and keep you wondering what lurks in the shadows. And don't forget to tap the notification bell so you never miss a new story when the darkness calls out to you. I don't talk about this night very often, but it's one of those memories that never really leaves you. It doesn't fade the way other bad memories do. It sits there, quiet most of the time, and then something small will bring it rushing back. A certain tone of voice, a sudden loud knock, the sound of metal striking wood. Even now, years later, my body still reacts before my mind catches up. At the time, I was in my early 20s. I had recently moved into a new rental house with a friend. The place was up in the hills, on almost an acre of land, set back from the road and surrounded by trees. It felt secluded in a peaceful way during the day, the kind of place you choose because you want distance from noise and people. At night, though, that same isolation could turn unsettling very quickly. I had an ex-girlfriend who was unstable and abusive. When we were together, she had been verbally cruel and physically violent more than once. Getting out of that relationship hadn't been easy, and even after it ended, I carried a constant low-level fear that she might show up one day. I tried to tell myself that was paranoia, that she'd eventually move on, that I was safe now. I was wrong. One night she showed up unannounced at the new house. My friend and I were inside, winding down. We had just smoked a little weed, nothing heavy, but enough that we weren't thinking as clearly as we should have been. We were relaxed, distracted, and not in the best position to make smart decisions. Looking back, that detail matters, not as an excuse, but as context for why we did what we did next. Suddenly, we heard shouting. At first, it didn't even register that it was her. The sound carried strangely up there, echoing off the hills. Then I recognized her voice. She was standing in the driveway, yelling, taunting, calling out insults. She was saying vicious, personal things she knew would hurt. My stomach dropped. My heart started racing so hard, it felt like it was slamming against my ribs. We were terrified. This wasn't just an awkward confrontation with an angry ex. This was someone who had already hurt me before. Someone who didn't respect boundaries, someone who fed off chaos and fear. And she had shown up at our secluded house late at night, clearly unhinged. We should have called the cops immediately. We didn't. Part of it was fear, part of it was denial, part of it was the weed, which had us second-guessing ourselves and downplaying the seriousness of the situation. We convinced ourselves that if we just waited it out, she would get bored and leave. That was our first bad decision. The doors were locked, and after a few minutes of listening to her rant outside, we decided to go upstairs to my room and hide out. We thought being out of sight would make her leave faster. We didn't want to engage. We didn't want to escalate things. That was our second bad decision. This was before cell phones were common. We had a cordless phone, but we left it downstairs in the living area when we went up. At the time, that didn't feel like a big deal. We didn't fully grasp how fast things could spiral. The house had an attached tool shed on one side. At some point, she went in there. We heard the noise first. Metal clinking. The scrape of tools being moved. Then silence. A kind of silence that's worse than shouting because you know something is happening, but you don't know what. Then we heard her outside again. She had found a claw hammer. The first thing she did was go after my car. I heard the hood pop. I heard metal being struck. Later, I found that she had trashed my distributor cap and wire leads. At the time, I didn't even care about the car. That damage was almost comforting because it meant her anger was focused on something that wasn't us, at least for the moment. That relief didn't last. Next, she went to the back of the house. There was a sliding glass door that led into the kitchen. I don't know how long it took her, but she managed to jimmy it open. The sound of glass shifting and the frame giving way is something I can still hear in my head. She was inside. The moment we realized that, fear took on a different shape. This wasn't someone yelling from the driveway anymore. This was an intruder, someone with a weapon, someone who had already demonstrated she was willing to destroy property and ignore boundaries. We heard her banging around downstairs, cabinets, furniture, footsteps. It felt like an eternity, but it was probably only a minute or two. Every sound made my heart jump. I remember holding my breath, listening, trying to pinpoint where she was. Then the footsteps started toward the stairs. The upstairs of the house had been added on later. It used to be a garage converted into living space with 2 bedrooms added above it. The interior doors up there were solid oak, See, heavy, sturdy. At the time, I was grateful for that. In a way, I'd never been grateful for a door before. She reached my bedroom door. What followed was one of the most terrifying experiences of my life. She started cycling through emotions rapidly. One moment she was crying, pleading, begging me to come out and talk to her. Her voice sounded broken, desperate. The next moment she was screaming insults, hurling homophobic slurs, saying things designed to humiliate and provoke. It was like listening to multiple people take turns speaking through the same mouth. Then she started hitting the door with the hammer. The sound of metal striking solid wood echoed through the hallway. Each hit sent a shock through my body. I didn't know if the door would hold. I didn't know how long it would take for it to give way. I imagined the wood splintering, the lock failing, her bursting through with that hammer raised. I remember thinking, very clearly, that this felt like a horror movie, the kind where you yell at the screen because the characters made bad choices. Only now I was one of those characters. My friend and I had to do something. My friend was a cyclist. He had his bike downstairs in the main room. We came up with a plan that felt desperate and insane, but it was the only option we could see. I would stay in the room and keep her attention focused on me, responding just enough to keep her at the door. Meanwhile, my friend would climb out of the bedroom window onto a small overhang, drop to the ground, sneak back into the house through the already breached sliding glass door, grab his bike, and ride as fast as he could to the police station downtown, about 2 miles away. We didn't know if she would hear him. We didn't know if the bike was damaged. We didn't know if she would catch him before he got away. But we knew we couldn't both leave, and we couldn't stay there forever. He went out the window. I stayed behind the door, my heart pounding, my mouth dry. I tried to keep my voice steady when I spoke to her, responding just enough to keep her engaged. She alternated between sobbing and rage, between begging me to open the door and smashing it with the hammer. At some point, she heard something. I heard it too. The faint sound of movement downstairs. She paused, then ran back down the stairs. A moment later, I heard her scream in frustration. My friend had gotten the bike and was already flying down the driveway. She chased him as far as the driveway, yelling, stomping around like an enraged animal that had just watched its prey slip away. That image has never left me. The raw fury, the sense that she was barely contained. Then, suddenly, she stopped. For reasons I still don't fully understand, she got into her car and drove off. But instead of turning right toward the main road, she turned left into a dead-end cul-de-sac a couple 100 yards away. I watched from an upstairs window, trying to keep track of her headlights, terrified she would circle back. It felt like hours, but eventually a police officer arrived with my friend. Relief washed over me so fast it made me dizzy. I came out of the room shaking, my legs weak, my whole body buzzing with adrenaline. The officer interviewed us and surveyed the damage. The broken sliding door, the destroyed car parts, the splintered oak door upstairs, deeply gouged where the hammer had struck again and again. He told us we had every right to press charges. For reasons I still don't fully understand, I didn't. I was young. I was overwhelmed. I just wanted it to be over. I wanted her gone, escorted away, out of my life. I wasn't thinking long term. I wasn't thinking about consequences. I was thinking about surviving the night. He didn't ask about the weed, or if he did, he didn't say anything. I've always imagined he smelled it and chose not to make it an issue, focusing instead on the far more serious situation at hand. He found her in the cul-de-sac. It took a long time. I watched from the window, my stomach knotted, as he spoke to her. Eventually, he followed her out to the main street and away from the neighborhood, where after that night, I got a restraining order. The physical damage was manageable. I paid a couple $100 for a new oak door. The owner of the house was kind about it and even stained it for me. The damage to my car's ignition system was relatively minor. None of that mattered much in the long run. The mental damage was harder. The sound of her voice that night, the hysterical screaming, the pleading that turned into venomous taunting, the relentless pounding of that hammer against the door, all of it stuck with me. It still does. Trauma has a way of embedding itself in your nervous system long after the danger is gone. Years later, I found myself thinking about her again. Not with longing, but with curiosity, with a need to understand what happened, what became of her, whether she ever found peace or just kept spiraling. I started Googling. I found out she had died about 20 years after that night. Hodgkin's lymphoma. When I learned that, my reaction surprised me. I felt relieved, deeply relieved. Knowing she could never show up again, never hurt me again, never become a threat to anyone else I cared about, brought a strange sense of closure. But I also felt sad, not for what she did, but for who she was, for the pain that clearly consumed her, for the fact that someone so volatile, so destructive, was also someone who had once been part of my life. The two feelings existed side by side, and they still do. That night changed me. It taught me how quickly things can turn dangerous, how denial and hesitation can make things worse, how important it is to take threats seriously, especially from people who have already shown you who they are. It also taught me something uncomfortable about empathy. My dad used to say that understanding someone doesn't mean excusing them. I understand now. I can recognize that she was deeply troubled and still acknowledge that what she did was terrifying and unacceptable. The house is long gone from my life. The door was replaced. The car was fixed. My friend and I moved on, but the memory remains. That night lives in the sound of a hammer striking wood, in the echo of screaming in a quiet, wooded place, in the realization that sometimes the most frightening monsters aren't strangers, but people who once knew you intimately, and that's the part that still haunts me the most. It started as one of those completely ordinary Friday nights that don't feel important while you're living them. Nothing dramatic, nothing unusual, just me and a couple of friends hanging out, killing time the way people do at the end of a long week. We were laughing, talking about nothing in particular, just enjoying the fact that we were together and had nowhere else we needed to be. I was driving. At that point in my life, driving was just another routine thing. I didn't think twice about it. I'd driven countless times before. There was no warning, no sense that something was about to go wrong. The road ahead of us was familiar. The night felt calm, normal, and then, without any lead-up that I can remember, my body betrayed me. I began having a seizure while driving. There's a strange blankness when I try to recall the exact moment it started. It's not like a movie where everything slows down or alarms go off in your head. There was no internal voice saying something was wrong. One second I was driving, the next second I wasn't really there anymore, even though my body was still moving. The car veered off course. I drove directly onto the light rail tracks. From what I was told later, the shift was sudden, no braking, no attempt to correct the wheel. Just a hard, terrifying move off the road and onto the tracks where a train could come through at any moment. The kind of place you are never, ever supposed to be in a car. Person one, who was sitting in the back seat, started screaming, not yelling, not shouting, screaming, pure, uncontrolled fear. The kind of sound that comes from someone who believes they're about to die. I didn't register it the way a normal, conscious person would. I heard noise, but it didn't connect to meaning. It didn't trigger panic in me the way it should have. Person two, sitting in the front seat, reacted immediately. They tried to take control of the situation. They reached for the steering wheel, trying to pull us off the tracks. They were shouting at me, telling me to stop, to let go, to do anything that would give them control of the car. From their perspective, they were watching disaster unfold in real time, knowing that a train could appear at any second. But I wasn't present in the way they were. In my seizure state, I didn't understand what was happening. I didn't understand why someone was grabbing the wheel. I didn't understand why there was screaming. My brain wasn't processing danger. It was misfiring, scrambling signals, disconnecting cause from effect. Instead of cooperating, I became angry. That's one of the hardest parts for me to think about now. I wasn't scared. I wasn't trying to help. I was confused and agitated, reacting emotionally without any grasp of reality. From inside my own head, it felt like someone was attacking me or trying to take something from me. The anger wasn't rational, but it was real. And because I was the one behind the wheel, that made everything even more dangerous. Person 2 kept fighting for control. They didn't freeze. They didn't give up. They did everything they could to wrestle the car away from me without fully understanding what was happening to me medically, only knowing that if they didn't act, we might all die. The back seat was chaos, screaming, crying, panic so thick it must have felt suffocating. And then, just as suddenly as it started, the seizure ended. I came out of it. There's no dramatic awakening, no clear moment where everything snaps back into place. It's more like surfacing from deep water. Sounds rush in first, sensations follow. Awareness creeps back slowly, and with it comes confusion. I remember realizing I was on the tracks. I remember the look on person 2's face. I remember the fear in the car, heavy and sharp and undeniable. Person 2 had managed to get us off the tracks. Later, we figured out it was about 30 seconds. 30 seconds between us clearing the tracks and the train passing through. 30 seconds between survival and something unthinkable. When the train went by, the sound was overwhelming, loud, violent, impossible to ignore. The ground shook, the air vibrated. Watching it rush past the place where our car had been moments earlier made everything feel unreal, like we had slipped through a crack in time. If we had been even slightly slower, if person 2 hadn't acted as fast as they did, if I hadn't come out of the seizure when I did, there is no doubt in my mind that the outcome would have been catastrophic. People would have died. I think about that a lot. In the immediate aftermath, everything felt distant. My body was there, but my mind felt detached, like it was trying to protect itself by keeping the full weight of what happened at arm's length. My friends were shaken. Person 1 was crying uncontrollably. Person 2 was trying to steady themselves, their hands still trembling from adrenaline. I kept apologizing over and over again, but apologies felt meaningless. What do you say when you almost killed yourself and the people you care about without even knowing it was happening? How do you take responsibility for something that happened while you weren't truly conscious? The days that followed were worse in some ways. Once the shock wore off, the reality set in. I replayed the night again and again in my head. I imagined what it must have looked like from the outside. A car swerving onto train tracks, a driver not responding, friends screaming, someone desperately trying to wrestle control away. I imagined the headlines that could have existed, the phone calls that would have been made, the families who would have been left behind. I also had to confront something terrifying about myself. I had no warning, no aura, no sense that a seizure was coming, no physical signal that would have told me to pull over or ask someone else to drive. It just happened, and that meant it could happen again. That realization changed everything. I could no longer trust myself behind the wheel. Driving isn't just about you, it's about every other person on the road. Pedestrians, cyclists, passengers. A seizure while driving isn't just a medical event. It's a weaponized accident waiting to happen. And I couldn't live with the idea that I might put someone else in danger again. So I stopped driving. That decision wasn't easy. driving represents freedom in a lot of cultures, independence, adulthood, the ability to go where you want, when you want, without relying on anyone else. Giving that up felt like losing a piece of myself. It meant reorganizing my life around transportation, asking for rides, using public transit, planning everything more carefully, but none of that compares to the alternative. Every time I think about driving again, my mind goes back to the tracks, to the screaming, to the anger I didn't understand at the time, to the train roaring past seconds later, to the knowledge that survival wasn't because of skill or luck on my part, but because someone else acted quickly enough to save us. I live with a strange mix of gratitude and guilt. Gratitude that my friends survived. Gratitude that no one was hurt. Gratitude that the train was just far enough away. Gratitude that person two didn't hesitate. And guilt because my body put them in that position in the first place. I've talked to doctors since then. I've learned more about seizures, about how unpredictable they can be, about how the brain can shut down logic and awareness without warning. Understanding the science helps, but it doesn't erase the emotional impact. There's also a kind of fear that lingers quietly in the background. Not panic, not constant dread. Just an awareness that something inside you can fail without notice. That your sense of control is, in some ways, an illusion. That the body you rely on to carry you through the world has its own rules, and sometimes it doesn't warn you before breaking them. That night changed how I see myself. It changed how I see responsibility. It changed how I see luck. I don't drive anymore, and I don't regret that decision, even though it's inconvenient and sometimes frustrating. Every inconvenience is a reminder that we lived, that my friends went home that night, that no families got phone calls they shouldn't have had to receive. Sometimes people don't understand when I explain why I don't drive. They assume it's anxiety or fear or an overreaction. They don't see the tracks. They don't hear the screaming. They don't feel the moment when reality snapped back into place and revealed just how close we came. But I do, and that's enough. That Friday night started like nothing at all. Just friends, a car, a drive, and it ended with a decision that permanently reshaped my life. Not because I wanted it to, but because it had to. I don't drive anymore because I was given a second chance, and I'm not willing to gamble that away. I don't remember most of my early childhood with much clarity, but there is one night that never fully faded. Even now, years later, when I think about it, the memory still feels sharp in places, like it never finished settling into the past. I was very young, maybe 4 or 5 years old, and at the time I didn't understand how close I came to something that could have changed my entire life. That night, my godparents took me to the mall. It was supposed to be a simple outing, nothing special, just one of those normal evenings where adults run errands and kids tag along. I remember the mall feeling huge, full of lights, sounds, and movement. To a child that age, it felt like a small world of its own. I felt safe there, surrounded by people, noise, and familiarity. Near the entrance of the mall, there were those little coin-operated rides they sometimes put outside or near food courts, the kind shaped like animals or cars where you put in a coin and the ride rocks back and forth for a few minutes. I loved those things. To me, they were magical. You sat down, held on, and for a few moments the world was simple and fun. My godparents let me ride one of those machines while they went to an ATM nearby to withdraw some money. They were always very protective of me. They watched me closely in most situations. But that night, just for a short moment, their attention was elsewhere. They were only a few steps away, but they weren't looking directly at me. At the time, that didn't feel strange. I was used to being allowed small freedoms like that. I was focused on the ride, on the movement, on the sound it made. I wasn't worried about anything. I didn't feel unsafe. I didn't think there was any reason to be afraid. Then a man approached me. I remember him standing close enough that he filled my view when I looked up. He was an adult, and at that age, adults automatically felt like authority figures. You don't question them. You assume they belong wherever they are. You assume they know what they're doing. He spoke to me in a rough voice, not angry, but firm, serious. He said, "Son, so this is where you've been. I've been looking for you everywhere." Those words confused me immediately. I didn't recognize him. I didn't know who he was. But I was very young, and my brain didn't have the tools to process that confusion properly. I remember feeling puzzled, trying to make sense of what he was saying. Adults didn't usually lie to me, and the way he spoke sounded confident, like he knew exactly what he was doing. Before I could fully react or think about it, he grabbed me. He lifted me off the ride and started carrying me away. Everything happened very fast. One moment I was sitting on the little machine, and the next moment I was being held by a stranger, moving through the mall toward the parking lot. That was when I started to panic. I began yelling and crying as loudly as I could. I screamed, I kicked, I struggled. I remember my voice feeling raw, like I was using everything in my body to make noise. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew something was wrong. I knew I didn't want to go with him. I knew I wanted my godparents. What's horrifying to think about now is that people saw us. We passed by other adults, other shoppers, other families, and no one stopped him. No one asked a question. No one intervened. To them, it probably looked like a normal situation. A child being carried by a parent or relative. A child throwing a tantrum because they didn't want to leave the mall. Children cry all the time. Children scream. Children resist adults they know. That's what makes situations like this so dangerous. A predator doesn't have to be quiet or sneaky. They just have to look confident enough that people assume everything is normal. As he carried me toward the parking lot, I kept screaming. My body was tense. My heart was racing. I remember the lights changing as we moved farther from the mall entrance, the noise fading slightly, the air feeling different. I don't know how long it took, but it felt like forever. Then suddenly, I heard a familiar voice. My godmother. She came running into the parking lot, yelling. Her voice was loud, sharp, full of panic. She was shouting at the man who was carrying me. In that moment, everything shifted. The control he had over the situation cracked instantly. He stopped. He turned to her and started explaining. He told her that he had made a mistake, that he thought I was his son, that he had been looking for his child and got confused. He apologized. He handed me back to her. He kept talking, calmly, confidently, spinning the story just enough to sound reasonable. And my godmother believed him. That's one of the hardest parts of this story for me to sit with. My godmother is an extremely kind person, but she has always been naive. She believes people easily. She trusts explanations if they sound sincere. She assumes good intentions unless something is obviously wrong. The man didn't look nervous. He didn't run. He didn't act guilty. He spoke calmly, as if this were all a simple misunderstanding. He even stayed for a bit, continuing to explain himself, as if he wanted to make sure everything felt resolved. Then he walked away. He went to his car and left. What makes that moment especially disturbing is that he didn't even pretend to look for the alleged son he claimed to have lost in the mall. He didn't ask for help. He didn't scan the area. He didn't seem concerned at all about finding a missing child. He just left. At the time, I was too young to understand what that meant. I was crying, shaken, clinging to my godmother. She was upset too, but not in the way you might expect. She didn't fully grasp what had almost happened. To her, it was a strange but harmless misunderstanding. A man made a mistake. A child was returned. End of story. In my family, we talked about it once. Just once. Then we let it die. We buried it. No police report, no follow-up, no long conversations about what could have happened. It became one of those things people quietly agree not to bring up again. Maybe because it was uncomfortable. Maybe because admitting how close it came would have been too frightening. As a child, I didn't question that. Kids accept what adults decide is normal. But as I got older, the story didn't disappear. It came back in pieces, in thoughts, in moments when I imagined alternate versions of my life. Sometimes out of nowhere, I would wonder where I would be now if my godmother hadn't run into that parking lot when she did. If she had been a minute later. If the man had walked faster. If my screaming hadn't drawn attention quickly enough. Those questions don't have answers. And that's what makes them so unsettling. I think about how easily he convinced everyone around us that what was happening was normal. How no one intervened while I was being carried away. How close I came to disappearing without anyone realizing what was happening until it was too late. The scariest part isn't just the man himself. It's how ordinary everything was around him. A mall, a ride, people shopping, life going on. Evil didn't show up in a dramatic way. It showed up disguised as a concerned parent, using words that sounded familiar and safe. As an adult, I understand now that this was almost certainly an attempted kidnapping. The confidence, the lie, the immediate attempt to remove me from a public space. The lack of concern for the imaginary missing child afterward. All of it points in one direction. But knowing that doesn't bring comfort. Instead, it brings a strange sense of vulnerability that never fully goes away. The realization that sometimes safety depends on timing, on chance, on someone looking up at the right moment. I don't blame my godmother. She truly believed what he said. She couldn't imagine that someone would lie so casually about something like that. And back then, people didn't talk about these dangers the way they do now. Stranger danger wasn't a constant conversation. Trust was more freely given. Still, it's hard not to feel unsettled when I think about how easily it could have ended differently. I sometimes wonder what his plan was, where he would have taken me, what would have happened if no one had stopped him. Those thoughts don't lead anywhere good, so I try not to dwell on them too long, but they surface anyway, especially when I hear stories of missing children or see cases where someone wasn't as lucky as I was. What stays with me the most is how powerless I felt in that moment. Being so small, being lifted up and carried away, screaming and not being heard in the way that mattered. It's a feeling that doesn't fully leave you, even as you grow older. That night taught me something I didn't consciously understand until much later. That danger doesn't always look dangerous. That bad intentions can wear a calm face and a believable story. That crowds don't always protect you, and that sometimes survival comes down to a single moment. A person turning around, a voice raised at the right time, a coincidence that interrupts a plan. We never talked about it again in my family. Life moved on. I grew up. The mall became just another place. The memory faded into the background of everything else. But it never fully disappeared. Sometimes when I'm alone with my thoughts, I picture that parking lot, the man walking away, the moment just before my godmother arrived, and I feel a quiet chill run through me, even now, because I know how close I came to vanishing, and I know that if things had gone just a little differently, I might not be here wondering about it at all. I grew up in Brisbane, Australia, and I went to school during the 1970s, a time that now feels very far away, but also strangely vivid in my memory. Society felt different then. There was more freedom for kids in some ways, but also a growing awareness that the world wasn't as safe as people once believed. One of the clearest memories from my childhood isn't a single event, but a constant presence that seemed to surround us everywhere we went. It was the Stranger Danger campaign. It was everywhere, on television, between programs, on billboards you'd pass in the car, on posters at bus stops and in shopping centers. I'm fairly sure it was on the radio too, because I remember hearing the same voice over and over again. Even in print media, newspapers and pamphlets, the message was repeated constantly. The idea was simple and drilled into us relentlessly. Children should never trust strangers. Never go with someone you don't know. Never accept gifts, rides, or help from unfamiliar adults. At the center of all of it was one man. His name was Constable Dave Moore. At the time, he was presented as the perfect face of safety. He was a police officer and he was everywhere. He had a friendly smile, a reassuring tone, and a way of speaking that made adults feel comfortable and made kids feel like they were being looked after. He didn't come across as strict or intimidating. He came across as warm, approachable, and trustworthy, the kind of person you'd expect to protect children. He wasn't just a figure on a screen or a poster. He came into our schools. Like many primary schools across southeast Queensland, ours received visits from him. I still remember the day he came to my classroom. We were young, sitting at our desks, half excited because a police officer was visiting, and half restless because it meant a break from normal lessons. When he walked in, he didn't feel scary or authoritative. He felt friendly, animated, almost like a children's TV personality. He talked to us about strangers, about how some adults might pretend to be nice, or pretend they needed help, or pretend they knew your parents. He told us stories designed to stick in our minds. He made eye contact, he smiled. He used simple language so kids could understand. He made jokes here and there, just enough to keep our attention, and the message was always clear. Do not trust strangers. Do not go with anyone you don't know. Do not believe adults who ask you to keep secrets. At the same time, there was another message woven just as firmly into everything he said, one that felt natural and unquestionable at the time. You can trust police officers. You can trust teachers. You can trust authority figures. That was the framework we were given as children. The world was divided into safe and unsafe, good and bad, stranger and trusted adult. And the police, especially someone like Constable Dave Moore, sat firmly on the safe side of that line. Looking back, it's hard to explain how deeply that message sank in. When you're a child, especially in a school environment, you're conditioned to believe what you're told by adults. When those adults are backed by uniforms, institutions, and constant media reinforcement, you don't question it at all. Why would you? This man was endorsed by the government, by the police force, by schools, by parents. He wasn't just one voice. He was the voice. For years, he remained part of the background of childhood in Brisbane, a symbol of safety, a reminder that danger came from out there, from unknown faces, from people who didn't belong in your life. He was the person teaching us how to protect ourselves. Then, in the early 1980s, everything collapsed. It came out that Constable Dave Moore was not who he claimed to be, not who we were told he was, not who we had been trained to trust. It was discovered that he was a violent pedophile and a rapist of children. Even now, decades later, typing that feels surreal. The man whose entire public role was built around protecting children from predators turned out to be one himself. And not in a minor or ambiguous way. The accusations weren't rumors or misunderstandings. They were real. They were serious, and they were devastating. When the news broke, it sent shockwaves through the community. Parents were horrified. Schools were shaken. People who had grown up seeing his face on posters and television suddenly had to reconcile two completely opposite realities. The trusted policeman, the violent abuser. For those of us who were children during the height of his campaign, the betrayal was profound, even if we didn't fully understand it at the time. As kids, we didn't grasp the full scope of what he had done, but we felt something crack. Something didn't line up anymore. As adults, the horror of it becomes even clearer. This wasn't just a criminal who happened to be a police officer. This was someone placed deliberately and systematically in positions of trust and access to children. Someone who used authority as camouflage. Someone who understood exactly how trust worked and exploited it. The psychological damage of that kind of betrayal runs deep. The stranger danger campaigns taught us to fear the unknown man in the shadows, the mysterious figure offering candy or a ride. They didn't teach us to question the smiling adult in uniform, the man invited into classrooms, the person endorsed by institutions. In fact, they taught the opposite. They taught obedience. They taught trust in authority. And that's what makes this story so disturbing, because it reveals how simplistic those messages were, how dangerous it is to teach children that trust is based on labels instead of behavior, how easily predators can hide in plain sight when they wear the right uniform and say the right words. I know that he was arrested. I know he was convicted. I know he went to prison. The details of his sentencing and incarceration were never something people talked about openly, at least not in the circles I moved in. His name seemed to vanish almost overnight. One moment he was everywhere, the next he was nowhere. That disappearance is telling in itself. There was no long public reckoning, no constant revisiting of the case in the media, at least not decades later. No documentaries replayed endlessly on television. His name faded, almost as if everyone wanted to forget that such a massive failure of trust had ever happened. Of course, people whispered, people speculated, and yes, everyone had the same dark thought about how a pedophile cop would be treated in maximum security prison. It was said quietly, with a kind of grim satisfaction, as if imagining his suffering made the betrayal easier to swallow. But beyond that, silence settled in. It's been close to 40 years now, and I rarely, if ever, hear his name mentioned. New generations grow up with no idea who he was or what role he played. Stranger danger campaigns evolved. The language changed. Awareness became more nuanced. But the damage done by that particular lie can't be undone. For me, what lingers most isn't just anger, it's confusion. How many kids trusted him completely? How many parents encouraged that trust? How many warning signs were ignored because he was one of the good ones? It forces you to confront an uncomfortable truth about how society works. Institutions are made of people. Uniforms don't guarantee morality. Titles don't equal safety. And when someone with power chooses to abuse it, the harm multiplies because of how many people believed in them. As a child, I remember feeling reassured when he spoke. I remember thinking that the world made sense. Strangers were dangerous, police were safe, teachers were safe. Adults who spoke kindly and confidently were safe. That framework didn't survive adulthood. Learning the truth about Constable Dave Moore didn't just change how I viewed him. It changed how I viewed authority itself. It planted a seed of skepticism that never fully went away. Not an unhealthy paranoia, but a quiet awareness that trust should never be automatic. I think about how many children were taught lessons by him, sitting cross-legged on classroom floors, listening intently, believing every word. I think about how many of those same children, years later, learned what he really was. That kind of revelation doesn't just shock you, it rearranges your understanding of safety. What makes this story especially haunting is how effective he was. He wasn't awkward, he wasn't suspicious, he wasn't visibly dangerous. He was personable, likable, and convincing, which is exactly why he was chosen as the face of the campaign. And that's the lesson that sticks. Predators don't always look like threats. They don't always lurk in dark alleys. Sometimes they stand at the front of classrooms wearing uniforms, smiling for cameras. The Stranger Danger campaign wasn't entirely wrong. Children do need to be cautious, but it was incomplete in a way that proved catastrophic. It taught kids who not to trust, without teaching them how to recognize danger when it wears a familiar face. Even now, so many years later, thinking about it gives me a strange, unsettled feeling. Not fear exactly, but a kind of cold awareness. A reminder that safety messages, no matter how well-intentioned, can become dangerous if they simplify the world too much. I don't hear his name anymore. It's like it was erased from public memory. But for those of us who grew up seeing his face everywhere, who sat in classrooms listening to him speak, the knowledge never fully disappears. It sits there quietly, a reminder that trust should always be earned, never assumed. That authority should always be questioned gently but firmly, and that sometimes the people telling you how to stay safe are the very ones you should be most careful around. That realization didn't come when I was a child. It came later, slowly, painfully, as the truth surfaced. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. I didn't hear this story directly from the man it happened to. I heard it from my ex-girlfriend, who told it the way family stories usually get told, carefully with certain details repeated and others left vague, like everyone involved still felt uneasy, even talking about it. It was about her uncle, and even though it wasn't something she experienced herself, the fear in her voice when she talked about it made it feel real in a way that stuck with me. Her uncle lived in West Virginia, deep in the mountains in a part of the state where towns are small, roads are narrow, and darkness feels heavier than it does anywhere else. If you've never been there, it's hard to explain just how isolated some of those areas are. Long stretches of road without houses, no cell service, thick forest pressing in from both sides. At night, the mountains swallow sound and light, and you can drive for miles without seeing another car. People who grow up there learn certain instincts early. You don't stop for just anything. You pay attention to the road, you trust your gut, and you listen when stories circulate, because in places like that, stories often come from something real. According to my ex, there was a period of time when people in that area were on edge because of rumors about a serial killer operating in the mountains. This wasn't something plastered all over national news, at least not at first. It was more local. Whispers, warnings passed from neighbor to neighbor. Be careful on that road. Don't stop if you see something strange. Lock your doors. What made it worse was how this killer supposedly worked. The story went that he targeted lone drivers, especially at night on secluded mountain roads, places where help was far away and visibility was poor. One bridge, in particular, became infamous. It was an old bridge, narrow, crossing over a deep drop surrounded by trees. The kind of bridge where you slow down automatically, where your headlights only show a small stretch of road ahead, and where stopping feels natural if something is blocking the way. That's where the killer set his trap. According to the story, he would use the body of a previous victim. He would place it on the bridge in such a way that a driver coming along would see it and instinctively stop. A body lying in the road is not something you can ignore easily. Most people would assume there had been an accident, someone hurt, someone who needed help. And that's what he counted on. The passerby would stop, get out of their car, maybe call out, maybe step closer to see if the person was alive. And that's when the killer would strike, emerging from the darkness while the driver's attention was focused on the body. In a place like that, with no witnesses and nowhere to run, it wouldn't take long. Whether every detail of that story was confirmed or not almost doesn't matter. What matters is that people believed it enough to change their behavior, enough to keep driving when they saw something that would normally force them to stop, enough to tell each other over and over, "Don't get out of your car." My ex's uncle knew about these stories. He wasn't someone who brushed off local warnings. He spent his life in those mountains. He understood that danger out there didn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it waited quietly. One night, he was driving alone. It was late, well past the time most people were off the roads. The kind of night where the sky is pitch black and the trees form a tunnel around you. His headlights cut through the darkness, but only just enough to show what was immediately in front of him. He approached that bridge. As he got closer, his headlights caught something lying across the road. A body. Not debris, not an animal. A human body sprawled on the bridge. Every instinct a normal person has would tell them to stop, to help, to check if the person was alive, to do something. That reaction is hardwired into us. Ignoring a body in the road goes against everything we're taught about being human. But in that split second, the stories flooded his mind. The rumors, the warnings, the repeated advice not to stop. The image of someone waiting just out of sight, hidden by darkness and trees, watching to see if he would take the bait. He didn't slow down. He didn't get out. He didn't even stop the car. He drove straight through the bridge, past the body, heart pounding, adrenaline surging, every muscle in his body tense. According to my ex, he said that moment felt unreal, like his body was acting on instinct while his mind lagged behind, screaming at him to do something else. He didn't look back. He kept driving until he reached a place where he felt safe enough to pull over. Then he called the police and reported exactly what he had seen. A body on the bridge, the location, the direction he was coming from. Everything he could remember. The police responded. I don't know all the details of what they found or what followed. My ex didn't either. Or at least she didn't share them. In family stories like this, the ending is often less important than the moment itself. The moment where a decision is made, where stopping or not stopping could mean the difference between life and death. What stuck with me wasn't just the idea of a serial killer. Horrifying as that is, it's something we've all heard about before. What stuck with me was the method. Using a body as bait, turning basic human decency into a weapon, forcing people to choose between compassion and survival. That kind of cruelty gets under your skin because it corrupts something fundamental. It takes advantage of the instinct to help, the reflex to stop when someone is hurt, and turns it into a death sentence. I keep thinking about what it must have felt like to see that body on the bridge, knowing exactly what it might mean. By knowing that stopping could get you killed, knowing that not stopping meant driving past someone who might still be alive, even if logically you suspected they weren't. That's not a choice anyone should have to make. And yet, in that moment, my ex's uncle made the right one. If the stories were true, if the killer really was nearby, waiting, then driving on, likely saved his life. The fact that he still called the police afterward says a lot about him. He didn't just ignore it and forget. He did what he could without putting himself directly in danger. It's scary to think about how close he came to disaster. If he hadn't heard the rumors, if he hadn't believed them, if he had been a little more tired, if his instincts had leaned toward stopping instead of fleeing, the outcome could have been very different. Now, what makes the story even more unsettling is how plausible it feels in a place like that. Remote mountains, narrow roads, long response times, darkness that hides movement. It's the kind of environment where someone with bad intentions could operate for longer than they ever could in a city. It also makes you question how many other people might have stopped before the warnings spread, how many victims came before the pattern was recognized, how many times someone did the right thing and paid for it with their life. Even now, just thinking about it gives me chills. It's one thing to imagine danger jumping out at you. It's another to imagine danger waiting patiently, using empathy as a lure. That kind of threat rewires how you see the world. It teaches you that sometimes survival means doing something that feels wrong in the moment. Yeah, driving past a body on a bridge goes against every moral instinct we're raised with. But in that situation, it may have been the only way to live. I've never driven through those mountains myself, but whenever I hear stories like this, I think about how differently people in isolated places have to think. City instincts don't always work in rural areas. Trusting that help is nearby can be a fatal mistake, and what haunts me most is how quiet it all sounds. No screaming, no chase. Just a dark road, a body in the headlights, and a decision made in seconds. My ex's uncle never saw the killer. He never saw anyone step out of the shadows. All he saw was the bait. And sometimes that's worse, because it means the danger stayed hidden, close enough to strike, but never revealed. Scary to think about doesn't even begin to cover it. It's the kind of story that makes you sit a little longer in your car at night, doors locked, engine running, wondering what you would do if your headlights suddenly picked out something lying in the road ahead, and hoping you never have to find out. If you're still here, it means these stories didn't just pass through you, they stayed. Every story you heard tonight was real. Real people, real moments. And in every one of them, something went wrong, or almost did. If you want to keep exploring the stories that don't let go so easily, subscribe to Shadow Archives, because there are more stories waiting, and not all of them end before it's too late.